is actually going to be quite ambitious here. So I'm going to attempt to sort of walk through the process for you of taking an HTML CSS site that you've already created. And so that is an important thing to understand here, is that you want to have already created your HTML CSS site. And then theming it for WordPress using a blank WordPress theme. So a couple things. The first thing we want to do is, this is the site we're going to turn. So this is my portfolio site. You can see it's just a simple index.html file that's calling up a stylesheet.css. Okay, so this is the page that we're going to theme for WordPress. We want it to look exactly like this, except for we don't want it to run on HTML CSS. We want it to run in WordPress. Okay, so this is our endpoint. Let's get through the steps of actually making it look like this. So the first thing we want to do is download the HTML5 blank WordPress theme. And there's a lot of options out there. But this is one I've used previously. It's at html5blank.com. You would just download the theme and unzip it, and you would see it as a master file folder. And inside of this folder, you'd see all of the blank template files that you would need to create a WordPress theme. Okay. This is already done for you. I've already created a URL for your team. I've already uploaded the HTML5 blank master theme to that URL. So for your WordPress install, that already exists. So you won't have to do this process, but I just want to show it to those that might be interested in doing this with their portfolios or with some other site. So you're going to want to get into your server, your web server, wherever your files are hosted, wherever your WordPress installation is hosted, and you would want to get into the themes folder of WordPress. And so to do that, it's inside of the WP content folder and then inside of the themes folder. And you'll see here my HTML5 blank master folder is already uploaded. So you would just upload it to your server, and then you would have it installed onto WordPress. Okay, so the next thing you'd have to do then is, under Appearance and then Themes, you would have to make sure that your HTML5 blank WordPress theme was active. In this case, it is active, right? So there's a bunch of default themes that you'll see. We want the blank theme active. Okay, and let's just take a look at what the blank theme looks like. So if we take a look at the blank theme, this is what it looks like. So it's just completely blank, right? It's a white background, there's nothing there, which is exactly what we want. We want to work from a blank canvas, okay? So the first thing that we can do is, under Appearance and then Editor, the first thing you'll see that pops up by default is the style.css. Okay, so this is the file, the CSS file that's controlling the all of the design and layout for this WordPress theme. And so what we want to do is, we could work within the confines of this, and actually that might actually be technically better, but we've already created a CSS file for our website. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delete this. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up the style sheet that we've already created. So you'll have already created this in the development stage, the first stage of development. And basically what you're going to do is you're just going to Control-A everything in that CSS file and paste it into the WordPress theme CSS file, and then click Update File. Okay, so far we haven't done anything. We've just replaced the existing CSS, which was nothing, with the CSS that we've already created. Okay, and so if we refresh, we can kind of see it looks different, right? It doesn't look good, but it's already, we can tell that it's taking some of our styles, and it looks different. Okay, so that's step one. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that when we call the home page when we call the home URL, so cashmereandcoco.com, we want it to go to the correct page. And so WordPress defaults to displaying posts. And so I also want to make a distinction between pages and posts. So you'll see here pages and you'll see here posts. The main difference is pages are more typical of a web page. A post is a single blog post. So we typically use posts only for blogging. And so we're going to build our site primarily in pages because that's what we're used to. We're used to creating pages. When we do, we'll talk a little bit about integrating posts and things like that. But right now, for now, we're just going to create a page. And so one thing we have to do in the settings right away is go to settings and then reading. We want to change the front page display to a static page. And we want to change that to our home page. And that's the only thing. I've created a page called home page. That's the only page that exists right now. And it's just a blank page. So you'll see it looks a little bit different now. Okay, so now this is our home page. When we type in the URL, our main URL, this is where it's going to go to. Okay. Before we start anything else, let's talk about WordPress a little bit and just sort of how it works. Okay, so the CSS is the same as HTML CSS, right? So we just copied and pasted the CSS into the CSS file for the WordPress theme. Everything else works a little bit differently. So what we want to do is, let's pull up my site again and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so our site is, my site has several different areas that I've sort of divided into either HTML5 tags or divs, right? So like I've got all of this in a header. This is in a nav, but also inside the header. And all of this gray is in a footer, right? And so all of the stuff with content in it, this here, from here to here, so anything with actual content in it, is what will actually be placed in the page. Okay, so, and when I say page, I mean literally this interface where we go to all pages, and we can see, we can edit my home page. This area is what you see is what you get editor, right? So if I type something in, this is a WYSIWYG, and I click update, it will actually appear on our page. So you can see that here. This is a WYSIWYG. That's what appears on the page. Okay, so it's important to understand this because this is what the client will interface with, right? So if the client wants to make a change, they want to edit something out, they want to add some details to a page, this is where they would do it. They would go to pages, and then they would go to the WYSIWYG interface, and then they would change it. So you can change things. You can make it bold, you can make it italics, you can make it big, you can make it small. So if we made it big, bold, and italics, it would then change on the page. So there it is. Okay, so that's important to realize because the only thing that this interface will control then is what we tell it to control, and what we tell it to control is going to be, for the purposes of this illustration, all of this stuff. Okay, so teach, research, collaborate, and all the content beneath it will go in this area, this page here. Okay, so let's take a look at our HTML again. And you can see, let me blow this up for you a little bit. We want just the, and just as a reminder, oops, sorry about that. We want just the teach, research, and collaborate sections in our page, right? So let's find teach, research, and collaborate. It looks like it starts here, okay? So I've got a div called left column, and that's where I start with my teach, research, and collaborate. So I'm going to copy all of this code from left column to before footer. Okay? And so essentially what WordPress theming does is, and I probably should have said this earlier, essentially what WordPress theming does is it takes all of these different areas and it splits them up into separate PHP files. Okay? So all of this content will be in one file called header. All of this stuff in the footer will be called in one file called footer.php. And then all this stuff in the middle will be called page.php. Okay, and so the reason why we want to do it is it basically segments or breaks apart all of the different sections in a web page and allows you then to pull dynamic content for each of these different sections. So that'll make more sense when we actually look at this in action and in practice, but that's just sort of the general concept that we want to break this apart. And so the first step of breaking this apart is taking the content and putting it in the page interface, in pages, okay? So you'll see here two options. There's visual, which is the WYSIWYG editor, which is primarily what the client will use, and then there's text, and this is just a pure HTML editor. Okay, so again, I've copied all of the stuff that's in my HTML that is in Teach, Research, and Collaborate. So I want to paste that just how it is. I want to paste that just how it is in the text box, and this is just the HTML editor. Okay, so you can see in the visual interface now we've got Teach, Research, and Collaborate, exactly what I wanted in there, right? And so if I was selling this to a client, I could say you can just go to Pages, Home, if you wanted to change something in Teach, right? So they don't actually have to know any HTML now to make any changes to the content in Teach, Research, or Collaborate. Okay, and so then I'm going to update. Okay, and the other thing I want to point out is we want to leave all our divs in there, right? So we want to leave our div left column. We want to leave our H1 class left here. We want to leave all of these divs in there because we've copied and pasted our CSS into the theme CSS file, right? So our CSS is calling these different divs, so they have to be in our page somewhere. Okay, so what we've got here now is we've got something that's not looking quite correct, but we've got some stuff on the page that's starting to look or starting to appear as though it's correct, right? So what is correct? We've got the right fonts. We've got the colored underline deal. We've got the right font for paragraph. We've got the right font for lists, and all of the spacing is correct, right? So the only thing that's actually incorrect now is it's not lining up correctly, and we'll take care of that later. But you can see it's already starting to sort of come into place. Okay, so that's step 2. So step 1 is just replacing the CSS. Step 2 is then pasting in the appropriate stuff that goes in the pages interface. Okay, so again, we just want stuff that is content that will change in the pages interface. We don't want to put our header information in the pages interface because the client isn't necessarily going to want to change the header all that often and or change the footer all that often. They're just going to want to be able to change the content. And so that's what we put in our pages interface is the content. Okay, hopefully that made sense. If not, I will show you all of this in class. Okay, so the next step then is let's get our header and stuff going. So let's go to Appearance and then Editor. And what we want to do is I want to point out a couple things here. So here is a list of all the different template files. And what you're going to primarily work in is header. You're going to primarily work in page.php, which is what controls the pages interface. and then footer.php, and then sidebar.php. Okay, so those are the 4 main PHP templates that you'll probably be working in. You may work in post, but we're just going to focus on those 4. So the first place to start naturally is the header. Okay, so the header is going to be everything that comes before our page.php, which is the content. So all of this stuff. Okay. So a few things I want to point out. First is you'll see that HTML opens in the header. Okay, so it's HTML, but it's HTML that's displaying the content, and it's PHP that's actually pulling the content from a database. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. HTML simply displays the content, so we're still using HTML, but PHP actually allows you to pull dynamically generated content from a database. Okay, so I can explain to you what's all is going on here, but you guys know what the head tag is. You know what these links are. One thing we should do is in our CSS we link to, or in our HTML we link to Google Fonts, right? So if you're going to link to Google Fonts, you're going to want to then add that in our header.php file. So we would just add that pretty much anywhere inside of the head. And I'm just going to add it right after the head opens. So now we're linking to the correct fonts. And we can see then, let's see if the fonts will pull up correctly now. I believe they did. I can't tell though. Okay, so we want to do that. The other thing I want to show you is, so here's the title tag, right? We all know what a title tag is in HTML, right? It's what shows up here in the tab. It's what gets indexed in by search engines and things like that. So the title tag is quite important. And what's interesting though is we know that the title tag opens and closes, and inside usually goes what you want to put in the title. So here's the first little PHP lesson. This little code here, so it's PHP WP underscore title, is saying instead of actually just putting text inside of the title tag, we're going to put in whatever the title is in WordPress. So you can control that under settings in general. So here's the site title and tagline, right? So if I wanted to then change my title to Chris Lamb, comma PhD, that's my site title now. That we can use that now to populate the title tag, and that should change then the title, as you see here. So that's pretty cool. So that's your first little bit of dynamically generated content. Okay, let's continue with our header.php file. So let's head back there. So that's the title. So all of that code is already in there. All of that code is already in there. That's already being populated with the blank template file. So all of this stuff will already be in here. Okay. So what we want to do is, after our head tag closes, so this is all of the metadata for our page, we open our body tag here, right? And this actually gives you an idea of like, okay, if you have a wrapper on your website, this is where you should enter it. So the blank template is nice because it gives you the, some indication of some things where things should go. So I'm going to delete that. I do have a container in my HTML, which opens after body, and that's right here. Okay, so I'm going to open that right here after body. And if you've got a header, they say you should probably put your header here. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to open up my header. And I'm going to paste it into the PHP file. And so you'll see here that I've also pasted in the actual content, right? So I've also pasted in the H1 and H2. We can dynamically generate that content, but I don't think it's going to change often, right? So if it's not going to change often, there's no reason to dynamically generate it, right? So I've actually just copied and pasted my entire H1, H2 here into the PHP file. So I'm going to update now and just show you some of the changes that we're seeing so far. Okay, and so you'll see that fixed our columns, which is nice, but that also shows you that our header and our H1 and H2 are showing up here where they're supposed to show up. Okay, so that's good. Let's continue. So this logo here is showing up because that's just what the default blank template does. Okay, so let's delete that. So we want to take this logo out. And in fact, yeah, we're going to take the logo out. We're going to delete the entire logo. So if you had a logo in your header, you might want to add your own logo or whatever, but we're going to take it out now because right now that's not what we want our site to look like. Okay, so that logo is gone now, and that actually killed our layout again, but we'll figure it out. So we want to take the logo out, and then what we want to do is we want to make sure that our HTML matches the HTML and CSS, the HTML and PHP in our theme. And we closed our header here. The theme automatically closed it here because that is what they think, that's where they think you should close it, but that's not where I want to close it. I've closed it up here, so that's going to delete the header. That should actually fix our columns again. No, of course it didn't. All right, we'll figure it out. So the next thing is our nav. So we've got our nav, and what we want to do though is instead of, they have nav class nav, and that is what they suggest using, but we've already created a CSS file, right? So we want to use the ID or class that we used. So I just call it nav. So we can just change this to nav. And instead of, and so this is the second part that'll sort of blow your mind, I think. So instead of, if we take a look at our HTML, usually in our nav we've got ULs, right? Like we've got an unordered list and list items for each navigation item. What's cool about WordPress and about PHP is inside of our nav we can have a piece of code called HTML5 blank underscore nav, and this will automatically populate into your navigation bar all of the pages that you've created. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Right now our nav is just being populated over here with home, right? Because that's the only page that exists. But if I added a page, so I'm going to add a new page. I'm going to call this CV because that's the next page, I think, that is in my portfolio, right? CV, yeah. So I'm just going to call it CV. And I'm going to order it number 2. So again, you can order what order you want them to appear in your navigation bar, and that's important to know too. But if I add that, I add a new page, it'll automatically create, you see that it automatically created CV here. So that's cool. The next thing that's sort of bothering me is I want to get rid of this leave a reply, and I want to get rid of all of this comment stuff, right? Because on our website we're not going to want comments it's not, we might want them on our blog site, but we certainly don't want them on our comment site. So, or on our homepage and things like that. So let's take away the comments, and the way that we do that, and also, I'm sorry, I'm just sort of jumping around here. We opened up our div ID container here. We want to close it in the footer.php file. So let's close it right here before the body closes. So just like we would in normal HTML, you'll see that the body closes here and the HTML closes here. It's just, again, segmenting the content. It's segmenting the information, breaking it up into separate files. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take away all of this stuff. So this logged in as and leave a comment and all that stuff. So let's get rid of that. And the main way we do that is we want to remove PHP comments template. Okay? And it actually tells you, remove if you don't want comments. So that's quite helpful. So I'm just going to remove it. And I am going to update the file, and that should remove comments. Yep, and they're gone. Okay. The other thing we want to do then too is we want to remove, you'll notice that there's a search bar here, right? And we're going to want to take that away because my site doesn't have a search bar there, but it's also just not being styled correctly and things like that, right? So it's like really long. So let's get rid of that. Right now that's being controlled by what's called a widget. So if we go to Appearance Widgets, you'll see widget area 2. There is some stuff. I'm just going to take this away. Let me see if that fixed it. No, that is not being controlled by widgets. Let's see. I think that's controlled in page.php as well. Let's see. So let's just walk through this PHP a little bit. So this is PHP get header. So basically this is saying display header.php. So all of that stuff we put in header.php, our header, our H1, our H2, our nav bar, that's what this is doing. The next thing is when we get into okay, so one thing we want to do is, I'm sorry, I'm relearning this now with you guys. So one thing we want to do is we want to remove the H1 PHP, the title H1. So this is, you'll notice here that it says home here. That's why that's happening, is because in an H1 tag, it's automatically pulling the title of the page, which is the title of the page that you've created, and displaying it on the page. But we don't want that because that's not part of our design. So that'll help us a little bit here. So let's update the file. Okay, so that removed home. That's good. And then the search bar, I can't figure out why the search bar, let's figure out why the search bar is here. I'm not seeing it. Maybe we want to take out main role equals main. And I'm just guessing now. let's look in the header again and see if there's anything in the header that is showing a search bar. There's nothing in the header that's showing a search bar either. Oh, search form.php. Search form. Okay. This will be my last try, and then we're gonna not worry about it for right now. Okay, that did it. Okay. So in the sidebar.php, it was automatically, what was happening is it was automatically populating a search form. And so I removed that. That was that piece of code I deleted. Okay, so we're good there. Let's continue. What else do we need to do? So we don't have anything in our footer. We don't have it, and we're actually missing some things in our header as well. So what are we missing in our header? We're missing that image. We're missing so we've got our header, we've got our nav. We're missing this, div ID spacing, all of this stuff. So basically what this is a bunch of divs that allowed me to create this image, populate this image, and then also create these little colored rectangles. So I forgot to add that in the head after the nav, so let's add that. So I just copied and pasted everything there into the header.php file. Okay, now we're looking good. Okay, so now we're really looking like we've got a site that looks like what we're trying to look like. It's getting close. So if you look at the original and then you look at our WordPress version, it's pretty darn close. And so we've got that. The last thing I'll show you for this video is the footer. So let's go into footer. And what we want to do in our footer is we want to make sure we've got everything in our footer that we need. And so where does my footer start? Right column. Here's where my footer starts. Okay. So we want to, I'm going to just use the content in my footer because I'm not planning on changing it much. So I want it to be static. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything inside of the footer here and paste what I had inside of my footer. Okay. And my footer is just called footer. So I'm going to change that to footer. And that should finish off the footer. Yeah, and it does. Okay. And so the only thing that's missing there is, and this is going to happen to you as you're porting over your sites, is when you're using things like image files, and some of these image files, because I did this last semester, some of these image files are already been renamed and re-uploaded. But basically, these image files are have to be re-uploaded into WordPress. Okay, so for example, where is my background image? Okay, so the background image for the footer is in my HTML file, I believe. Or no, it's in my CSS file. So let's look at that. And if we go find the footer, here we go. Here's the background image. And the reason why it's not there is because I don't have darkfishskin.png inside of a folder called images. And so what we can do is we can add to our library, and I thought I had already added it. Here we go. So here's darkfishskin.png. You're going to have to upload all of these yourself. So all of the image files you'll have to upload to WordPress, and then you'll have to change the URLs. So this is we want the image. We want the link to the image. So under file URL, and this is going to be useful for the client and things like that too. But under file URLs where you can copy and paste the actual file name. And so this is where you want to link to. Okay. So if I go back to my CSS and find footer again, we want to link to this file. Okay. That's where we want to link. We don't want to link to our old links because that was the old file structure, the old file system of our HTML CSS site. So that should work. Yeah. So there we go. And so that is, in a nutshell, in 40 minutes, 37 minutes, and also with some, hiccups along the way, I've turned our blank template into the same thing as our. So this is the real HTML CSS. This is the blank template. It's nearly identical. There's some things that need tweaking. There's some things with margins we can see that we'll need to tweak. But for the most part, we're looking pretty darn good. Okay. And so what we can do then, once you've got sort of your main theme in place, is you can start to add the content. And so we created a placeholder for CV, but there's nothing in there, right? So again, we would do the same process as we did with our other page, and we would go in and we would find all of the content, right? So nothing in the header or the footer. So once the header ends or the nav bar ends, that's where we want to put our content. And so that's with this, from this div to, there's a lot of content in this, before the footer opens. So I'm going to copy all of that. So I've copied all of this content, and I've gone to the text interface, and then I'm going to go click back to visual, and you'll see, hey, look, now a client or someone that doesn't know any HTML can come and can really edit all of this information the way that you want it to be edited. So let's refresh and see. So if we actually go to the CV now, it's appearing exactly how my CV does. Again, we didn't change. We're going to have to change the name of the links and things like that. That's going to happen. But for the most part, we've got everything going on in CV that should be going on. Okay. One thing that I am noticing though in CV is that the rest of our head is not showing up. And that's again because of the name of the file, right? So the name of the file that it's linking to in our head is incorrect. So let's find that file again. There's that cover. And again, we want to copy the file URL. And then, so if we go back to Appearance Editor, we can find our header and we can figure out where that PNG is. I'm not sure where that PNG is. Well, I'm not going to bore you with trying to find where the PNG file is, but that's where we would change it, and that's why it's not showing up. But for the most part, if we look at our CV and the content in the CV, it is laid out in a very similar fashion to this content. Okay. Now there's some extra little things we're going to have to do for secondary navigation bars. There's some extra little ways that we can do two-column layout. So right now our two-column layout's working. But there's ways to create a two-column layout that's a dynamic layout. There's ways to create a two-column layout or a three-column layout using sidebars and widgets. So there's a lot more that goes into this, and I need to fix that link. There's a lot more that goes into this, but as you can see, in 41 minutes, we're able to get the home page and the CV page, and we can essentially do the same thing we did for all the pages, just add them. So if we add portfolio, and then we make sure that's ordered third, we could do that for all the pages, and we could see it gets added, portfolio gets added automatically to the navigation bar, which is cool. But you can see in 40 minutes we were able to get almost the entire site laid out properly, right? Again, there's some little things that we have to do to fix, but for the most part we've got things laid out properly. Okay, so that's the idea. That's the main sort of process in which we do it. Let me just recap real quick what the process is. So the process is to first have a blank theme. Second is to implement your existing CSS. So the CSS that you've already used, you want to create. You want to just paste into the theme file. The next step then is to break up your HTML file into multiple PHP files. So again, all the stuff that goes in your header will go in the header.php file that we saw here. All the stuff that goes in your footer will go in the footer.php file where we saw here. And all the stuff, the actual dynamic content that might change, will go in the pages form, okay, which we created with this interface. Okay, and so we want to just, the most important thing is to put the different divs in the right places, right? So we opened up our container div, for example, in the header.php file, and we closed it in the footer.php file. Like, that's really important. If you don't do that, it's going to break the whole layout. We maintained the divs inside of these page layouts, right? So we included the divs inside of these page layouts, and that allows us to then call the HTML CSS properly. And what's cool too is all of our styles then get automatically integrated into the WYSIWYG, right? So our CSS, we styled our H1s a certain way, and the client then can, if they wanted to add an H1, they would just have to then use the WYSIWYG. And so it styles our H2s, it styles our paragraphs, right? So like we wanted to make this look like an H2, for example, just to show you what it would look like. It would style all of that information as an H2 here, right? So it's just the process of sort of understanding what's going on, sort of understanding what what controls what. And so that, I think that's a good intro or a good primer. Hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully the in-class lab will be really helpful as well.